Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy freaking Thursday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. And it's a great day to go through all things with our fantasy football ranks before an exhilarating week 2 officially gets underway. So joining me, as always, on this lovely Thursday morning, Dwain McFarland, Matthew Freedman. That's right, the gang is back together. Now, Freedman, last week, I thought you might be excited about week 1. You were not. You were more so excited about week 2. So how are we feeling now? Is it on to week 3? What are you thinking, Freedman?
Week 2 is finally here, guys. It's a great week. Look, week 1, I'm not going to say it's for amateurs, all right, but everyone gets excited about week 1. Week 2, all right, that's where champions are made in the fantasy streets. Like, can you move on from week 1 into week 2? And that's what we're doing.
I'll take that. That's some better optimism. Dwain, how are we feeling?
I'm much better now that Freedman, is actually on board with doing a show about fantasy in week 2 of fantasy football. So yeah, the vibes are great. We've got a game tonight, Ian. We've got news to talk about right off the top. People trying to make lineup decisions. Should I pick up a player? Should I drop a player? You and I know we were going through that a little bit last night. We were pinging each other back and forth in the Slack messages, and I think regretting our lives a little bit, like that we have so many teams. So it's all great when you're drafting them, Hartitz, and then we have to actually work through the pickups and drops, and it can be pretty brutal sometimes.
I was joking on the old Twitter sphere that, when people are going to criticize you saying you might have spent too much fab on a certain player, on the one hand, maybe you did. On the other hand, you're that much closer to not having any fab and thus not having to worry about, waivers on one less team out there, which when you have 30 plus of them, sometimes is much appreciated. But as Dwain said, the main point there, vibes are great, boys are buzzing. And with that, guys, let's get into our biggest news item of the day, Thursday night football edition. Of course, we have the Bills and Dolphins squaring off. Sadly, the Dolphins offense will not be at 100%. Raheem Mostert already ruled out with a chest injury, and Devin Achane is going to be a game-time decision with the ankle. Now, we did hear out of Dolphins practice that he seemed to be moving around pretty well on Wednesday. Personally, I'm tentatively expecting him to play, but Dwain, if he is out there, probably going to be at less than 100%.
Yeah, I'm assuming Achane's not going to be 100%. Anytime you're a game time decision, that's not great. Obviously, he's a tough player to bench because we know how explosive he can be. So, what is 80% Achane? Is that still like 150% of Zeke? I don't know how to necessarily answer that question. So that's kind of where I drew the line. I kept him ahead of all of the names like that in the ranks for now. And obviously, I'll be updating this throughout the day. But right now, I've got him in that Jerome Ford, Najee Harris, Tony Pollard range. If Achane's playing, I'm starting him over Jerome Ford in a tough matchup. I'm going to start him, over Najee Harris, who's in a split backfield scenario, and we got Justin Fields taking carries. But if you got players that are better than that, I'm probably leaning away from Achane tonight.
Looking at our consensus ranks right now, I have Achane RB15, Freedman RB13, Dwain a little bit lower than us at RB21. So certainly a bit of a tier there. But Freedman, I think the other big question is what to kind of make of the other guys now in this Dolphins backfield, because as we know with Achane, not exactly a 3-down workhorse in this offense, and we should have Jeff Wilson and Jalen Wright out there. Which one do you prefer out there if you happen to be a fantasy manager who needs another RB to start?
So assuming that Achane is out, and by the way, if Achane is in, I'm still playing him. There's no world in which Achane is playing in this game and on my bench, because I don't want to regret that decision when he goes off for 150 yards. But assuming Achane is out, Jalen Wright, I think, probably moves into that RB2 tier. And Jeff Wilson, I would say, RB 40-ish. In that range. Wright would clearly be the guy that I would prefer, but the thing is, we can't say that for certain because Wilson was the guy who was active last week, not Jalen Wright. So you just kind of have to throw your hands up in the air. And one thing that is worth pointing out, although Achane was limited in practice, which is kind of an encouraging sign given that he didn't practice before that, the Dolphins were one of the teams last year that would kind of do weird things with their injury reports where guys would practice limited all week, and you would think this guy has a decent chance of playing, and then he would be inactive. So even though Achane encouragingly was limited, that still doesn't mean that he's going to play. So you just kind of have to throw your hands up in the air and be sure to look at all this injury information the closer we get to kickoff.
NFL Network's Cameron Wolf did note that even though he was limited in practice, it was more of a kind of 75% walkthrough anyway. So good to see him not limping around, but again, something we'll need to monitor up until game time. Personally, Dwain, I will prefer Jeff Wilson for now. Look, if you don't have to start either guy, yes, please, for the love of God, have Jalen Wright on your bench. I think we all agree has more upside down the stretch. But Jeff Wilson was the RB3 last week, Dwain. And hey, things can change. But Dwain, right now, I have Jeff Wilson kind of in that tier. Ezekiel Elliott, Austin Eckler, Chuba Hubbard, lower end RB3s, hardly need to be forced in your lineup. But for me, Dwain, it's Wilson over Wright. Are you feeling the same?
Yeah, I have the same, just based off of the week one utilization. To Freedman's point, though, it could go totally the opposite. Now, I know the thing that people want to throw out there, and you've already kind of debunked it, Hartitz, good job by you, but was that, well, Achane wasn't active last year. Well, he was hurt. He was hurt going into that game. Jalen Wright was completely healthy. Of course, there's also Raheem Mostert and Achane on the team this year, so that makes it tougher for someone like Jalen Wright to be active when you know you have a guy like Wilson that you probably trust and pass pro, that sort of thing. So I don't want to say that I'm 100% certain this is the way it's going to go down, but yes, I'm with you. I've got Jalen Wright in that running back 4 territory, so he's going to have some upside there. And then for Wilson, I've got him in that Zeke range. Now, if Achane's inactive, I will be moving Wilson into the low-end running back 2 conversation, and then I think Wright moves into that boom-bust running back 3. I will say with Freedman, if you're just looking for a pure ceiling, it's Jalen Wright. Like, if you're looking for a guy that could drop 30 points in this game, it's him, not Jeff Wilson.
Now, guys, we do have a bit other news to go through. Remember, on Friday, Dwain and I go through all the fantasy-relevant injuries, but we do have some updates here in the meantime. At the quarterback position, Lamar Jackson not listed on the injury report at all. Good news after missing that Monday session with some general soreness. Also, Matt LaFleur leaving the door, quote-unquote, pretty open for Jordan Love to actually play this week. I still think he's going to be out, but yeah, definitely doesn't seem to be as long-term of an issue as it did, a short week ago. Russell Wilson also limited in practice with the calf, albeit we still do expect Justin Fields to start for now. At running back, Kenneth Walker not practicing with an oblique injury. Good reminder to go get Zach Charbonnet if he happens to be on any of those waiver wires. Christian McCaffrey limited in practice and says his mentality is playing this week. That said, he also thought he was going to play last week. Good news, though, Kyle Shanahan said he is not a candidate for IR. Thank God there. Audric Estime placed on IR. Nice little bump up for Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. Should be some Blake Watson in there as well. Wide receivers not practicing. Keenan Allen with a heel. Roma Dunze with a knee. T. Higgins with a hamstring. Hollywood Brown with a shoulder. And Jordan Addison with an ankle. And also Sean McVay said Puka Nacua could end up missing more than 4 weeks on IR. Just fantastic news. I'm sure every fantasy manager is thrilled about that. Titans head coach Brian Callahan did say DeAndre Hopkins should have more of a full-time snap count this week after being limited to 17 in week 1. When asked how the Giants can get Malik Neighbors more involved, Brian Dable responded, "Throw him the ball." Thank you, Brian. Josh Downs limited in practice with an ankle injury, said he feels 80 to 90%. So AD Mitchell, a little more time to hopefully seize that true number 2, number 3 job from Alec Pierce. And then finally at tight end, Dalton Schultz and Jake Ferguson, cowboy up over there, both not practicing. And also David Njoku already ruled out for Sunday. So hope you guys won those Isaiah Likely bids because that low end tight end 1 tier starting to evaporate in a hurry. So that was the news, guys. And now it is time for quarterback risers, fallers, Freedman's favorite, and yes, a sicko start. Love this foursome we got going on. And with that, fellas, let's get right into it with our QB riser of the week. That's right. It is Baker Mayfield, now squaring off against the Detroit Lions. Dwain, very impressive week 1 performance, and now facing a secondary that, let's face it, we haven't exactly seen them slow down opposing and passing attacks for the better part of the last few years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we saw Mayfield light up a really bad secondary in week 1. I will say I think the Commanders' secondary is actually worse than the Lions, even though the Lions gave up, a ton of yardage last year. And then in week 1, they gave up 317 yards to the Rams through the air. So I think this will still be a little bit tougher. The Lions have at least, tried to improve their secondary, Ian. They added Carlton Davis through free agency. They drafted Terry and Arnold in round 1. Those guys had some rough week 1s, okay? So, it hasn't come together yet, but there's a little bit of risk. But overall, yeah, I'm just leaning into this. I mean, the Lions have not gotten it together yet in the secondary, so I do think that Mayfield can take an advantage of that. It's also a 51.5 point game total, so that's the highest on the slate. There's going to be a lot of points scored. The Lions are 7-point favorites right now, so we know that Mayfield's going to have to throw the ball. So yeah, when I look at this, I've upgraded him to that low-end QB1 status, so I think you're safe to start him over guys like Joe Burrow and some other names that we'll talk about later.
Baker's last 3 games, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns, 349 yards, 3 touchdowns, and then again in week 1, 289 yards and 4 touchdowns. Freedman, the man's playing some really good football.
Yeah, Dwain absolutely crushed it there with the analysis. I second everything he said, especially the point about all of the new things going on in the secondary for the Lions. Like, in theory, they should be better this year than they were last year, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen right away. They have 3 new starting cornerbacks, and they moved nickelback Brian Branch to strong safety. So basically a totally reconfigured secondary. I think it's going to take them a little bit of time to get up to their full playing speed, which means Baker Mayfield for another week is going to crush.
Lions ran the 3rd most man coverage in week 1 per fantasy points data, and accordingly didn't do all that well with it, allowing the 5th worst contested target rate. So I agree with you guys. Should be a nice little jump up eventually, but for right now, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and yes, maybe even Jalen McMillan looking like beneficiaries. All right, guys, now for the QB faller, and sadly, I'm wearing a shirt. Great shirt. Shout out Homage, Joe Cool. Freaking love my guy Snoopy. You know, always just a cool dog out there. But Joe Burrow going to Burrowhead against the Chiefs. Dwayne, he's 3-1 against the Chiefs all time with plenty of past success, but let's face it, the Joe Burrow we saw in week 1 did not look like that same guy.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you don't have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase is coming off of a hold-in and apparently the flu or whatever the heck was going on with him, it's going to be tough to really go out there and put up fantasy points. So last week, it was really a bold call to say that we were benching Joe Burrow. He was our brass balls bench player of the week. If you guys want to see that, you can go check it out over on FantasyLife.com. The article is up. It's for free. You'll see who we're calling out to bench this week that maybe you wouldn't think you should bench. But it's a little bit easier this week, right? Because people already saw the bad week 1 performance. T. Higgins still not practicing. And then with Jamar Chase, like, how bought in is he? We don't know for sure. Like, I don't want to assume that Jamar Chase is going at 80%, but he has reasons to go get on the field and go to practice so that he can toll this season and have it count towards his contract. So we don't know for sure what's going on in this man's mind. We know that when Jamar Chase is right, he's 100%. Him alone with Joe Burrow is enough to give him upside. But you're playing against the Chiefs. You're 6-point dogs. The Chiefs were one of the better pass defenses in the league last year. Yes, last week they gave up quite a few yards to Lamar Jackson, but at the same time, a lot of those came in a leading game script where they were basically just inviting them to check the ball down underneath to Justice Hill, to Isaiah Likely, and then they were getting the yards after the catch. Yes, Likely did make that super sweet play that turned from what should have been a short gain into a long touchdown because he did a really good job. But overall, I'm still going to lean into the fact that I like this Chiefs defense. Yes, they lost one of their corners, but they also had one of the best corners in the league last year as a rookie. So I think this is just a situation where it's going to be really tough for Joe Burrow. I think the Chiefs put them in a situation where they are predictable by the end of the first quarter, which means they know the Bengals have to throw. And without multiple high-end weapons, I think the Chiefs are good enough to take away Jamar Chase.
Freedman, this Chiefs defense has certainly been shutting down passing attacks for the better part of the last, 2+ seasons at this point. I mean, the last time they gave up over 30 points was in the Super Bowl against the Eagles. And before that, it was against now retired quarterback Tom Brady in week 4 of that regular season. So yes, again, at Joe Burrow's best, we know he can take down any defense, but how low is too low to rank Joe Burrow this week, Freedman?
I mean, we all have him in that same general, like, mid QB2 type of tier. And 2 things to touch on here. One is the continuity that the Chiefs defense has. Normally if a team wins the Super Bowl and then wins it again, right, that coaching staff is just totally gutted. But defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, he's been there for years. He's got great with his coaching staff and with all of the players in that unit. So we have a pretty good sense year over year of what to expect from these guys. And Ian, as you mentioned, they have been one of the top pass defenses since. And then you look at what is going on with the Bengals, no T. Higgins, and the absence of Tyler Boyd. It's not as if he was all that important to the offense, but he was a really good number 3 receiver in the middle of the field. So T. Higgins gone. Andre Yoshivas has a lot of potential, but he's not as polished as T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd have been. And then, of course, you have a new tight end who comes into that team every year. There's just no continuity there with Joe Burrow and his pass catchers, and I think that is also plaguing him. And then, not to mention, the wrist injury seems as if it is lingering, and I will be very curious, how much the Twitter doctors end up focusing on this, because it might be a much bigger thing than we expect.
I'm not going to lie, as much as it is just one small clip, I'd prefer if Joe Burrow could pick up a water bottle with no problem. All right. Is that too much to ask for at this point in time? But yes, accordingly, guys, Justin Fields, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield, amongst others, all quarterbacks that we collectively have ranked ahead of Joe Burrow this week. Now, Freedman, it's time for your alley. It's Freedman's favorite. And my goodness, was he awesome in week one. Anthony Richardson, now in 3 career starts, he has finished as the QB4, and oh yeah, that's right, the QB4 again. So Freedman, talk about what Richardson has going for himself this week against the Packers.
You know, I love that we can get in the season and start talking about guys that I really like versus like in the off season. It's like, oh, I like this guy, but I would rather draft someone 3 rounds later. Now I can just be like, Anthony Richardson, love him, want him in all of my DFS lineups. Richardson was awesome last week, and I like the matchup he has going against the Green Bay Packers this week. Now, of course, like when I say awesome, yeah, I'm overlooking the fact that he completed only 47.4% of his passes. That's really bad, but that's also in keeping with what he did in college and what he did last year. Like, he's not a highly accurate passer, but it feels like that's kind of like the Josh Allen story. And if there is one guy who has kind of the chance of turning into Josh Allen, it feels like Anthony Richardson, who physically is very much in that Josh Allen or Cam Newton kind of mold. And I mean, when I say he was awesome, yeah, 212 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 interception, 10.9 adjusted yards per attempt. The guy hardly threw the ball, but when he was throwing it, I mean, he was like Steph Curry from half court, just launching it out there and connecting, right? And then that doesn't even take into account what he can do as a runner, the 56 yards on the ground with the added touchdown there. So you put it all together, the QB4 on the week, 27.1 fantasy points. And then you look at the Packers, who allowed 278 yards and 2 touchdowns passing last week to Jalen Hurts. And last year, they were number 30 in defensive dropback success rate. I think this is another game where Anthony Richardson can have success. And remember, this will be just the 6th start of his career. Like, that's pretty impressive for him to be at this point already, so raw and still so productive in real life and also especially for fantasy.
As Freedman mentioned, sub 50% completion rate, but yeah, still 26.1 fantasy points. Gotta love that. And guys, I mean, going back to week 1 of last season, he's tied for 4th in rushing touchdowns among all quarterbacks, with 5, despite playing, 6. It's going to be 6 games here at this point. So, Dwain, when Freedman talks about him being Cam Newton and Josh Allen-esque in terms of what he can just bring to the table physically, I agree. We have that, but then it's also like we have Jameis Winston's mind in there where we're also willing to throw the ball, 50 yards downfield on any given play. I mean, Dwain, really, if we had to go into a lab and try to build the most fantasy-friendly quarterback possible, we might come out with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, we would come out with Anthony Richardson with accuracy, which is what Josh Allen did. Yeah. Josh Allen started off as this inaccurate quarterback that just had all of the athletic traits and saved you on the ground, and then suddenly he became this accurate passer. Now, he is an outlier historically, so we can't just assume that's going to happen to Anthony Richardson. But here's what I'm going to say. To Freedman's point here, the floor is this. This is his floor. He's going to have games where he's actually going to complete 60% of his passes. He's not going to miss 3 chunk balls to A.D. Mitchell. He's going to hit one of those, and that's going to turn this into like a 30-plus fantasy performance. On some games, he might hit 2 of those balls, and he's going to suddenly be a 35 to 40-point fantasy player. So I love Anthony Richardson because it's what you see is what you get. It's like Freedman said, we already know the guy is a bad passer. He's been a bad passer. We're assuming that in our projections. We're assuming that in our ranks, and he's still a guy that you can't rank outside of the top 5 every single week.
Richardson, accordingly, is a consensus top 5 quarterback this week, and he should be in fantasy lineups of all shapes and sizes again against that date, against the likely Jordan Loveless Green Bay Packers. Now it is time for the Sicko Start of the week, and I know everyone, they're going to sound gross, but you know what, Dwain? You hit on 4 of them last week, so you got something going for yourself. Talk about Daniel Jones going up against the Washington Commanders' pass defense that very well might be the worst in the NFL.
You could probably just stop with he's facing the Washington Commanders, and like that's going to be enough. But there are a couple of other things here with Daniel Jones, and the first thing being that we really thought that he wouldn't be involved in the design run game at all this early in the season because he's coming off of the ACL. No, the Giants don't care. Forget Joe Shane and all those talks in the office when you're watching Hard Knocks about we got to make sure we protect this guy. No, they're just throwing him straight into battle. 22% of the team's design rushing attempts in week 1. That totally blew my mind. That is a high-end stat. I mean, we're talking about guys like Josh Allen are in that range. That's the range that Jalen Hurts is in. They're already putting Daniel Jones into that range. Maybe they just really want to see, Ian's quarterback. Maybe they're just setting things up for later in the year so that we can have the Drew Lock show. But this week, we do get Daniel Jones against the Commanders. You already mentioned how bad they are, Ian. I'm not going to repeat all the stats. You guys saw Baker Mayfield last week. Here's what I'll tell you to do. Just go look at the Washington Commanders depth chart, and you'll be done. You'll be convinced. Like, most of these players can't be a third cornerback on many teams in the NFL, much less two of them in a starting lineup. So those things give Daniel Jones hope. And then, of course, we can't do any sort of segment and talk about the Giants without mentioning one person here, Ian. It's Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is going to trash whoever he lines up against. And as long as Daniel Jones can just get him the ball, like, he could throw for 225, 250 yards against this defense. You come up with one long touchdown, and then let's say you come up with 30 yards on the ground and you happen to squeak out a rushing touchdown, you're going to suddenly be a top 6, top 7 quarterback on most slates. Now, who knows if that works out this slate? It might be like QB 11. But it sounds really gross. But yes, Daniel Jones, if you're in a pinch. And guys, this is called a sicko start because that means you're in a sicko league. We're not telling you to go pick up Daniel Jones and start him over, somebody we've got in our top 10. We're saying that, hey, you hated your QB performance in week 1 and you're thinking about benching someone like Kirk Cousins. Daniel Jones would be a name that I would consider.
Just please push the ball downfield a little bit, DJ. Obviously, big point of emphasis throughout the offseason. We saw it in the first half of preseason action, but you wake up after week 1 and look, and yeah, only Gardner Minshew had a lower ADOT than Daniel Jones. Somehow, I kid you guys not, PFF's second highest graded passer when throwing the ball at least 15 yards downfield last week, it was Daniel Jones, just wasn't willing to do it that often against the blitz-happy Brian Flores Vikings, who certainly were able to get home. Don't think we're going to see that same defensive effort this week. So I like it, Dwayne. You convinced me. I'm going to do some DFS lineups with Daniel Jones, and I'll blame you if they don't work out. So thanks for giving me that caveat. Guys, we got some running backs on the way, but first, a quick word to our friends over at Homage. Guys, we've been rocking the T-shirts all season long. Again, right now, I got my Joe Cool on. I mean, look at this dude. Look at him. Freaking look at him. He's awesome. I freaking love Snoopy, and I freaking love Homage because calling all fantasy football fanatics, the season is finally here. And while you may be stressing about start-sit decisions, waiver wire pickups, and what trade targets can help give you an edge this season, at least one thing is for sure. Homage is the place to go for your fantasy football gear this season. Homage's super soft, ultra comfortable NFL player apparel is a first-round pick that is sure to make your fellow managers jealous and allow you to gloat in style all season long. From past stat-stuffing legends. Again, I also just got a Brian Dawkins Weapon X t-shirt, so they really do have everything. To the current crop of fantasy studs helping you to secure this year's championship, they've got everything you need to gear up for the new season. Check out homage.com/fantasy. That's homage, HOMAGE.com/fantasy to reveal their top-ranked officially licensed player tees so you can rep your fantasy team with pride. Be sure to use promo code LIFE for an exclusive discount for Fantasy Life listeners. Pay homage. Guys, it's running back time now. Our riser, our faller, Freedman's favorite, and the Sicko Start. And we're going to kick things off with a certain riser. Freedman left people down last week, but all of a sudden, Derrick Henry has a home favorite against the Raiders, looking pretty good out there for fantasy managers.
Yeah, I have to say, so I include a number of players in the Freedman's Favorites article. Derrick Henry was one I didn't include because it just felt almost so obvious. It's like, oh, Derrick Henry at home as a 9 to 10 point favorite. Like, this is the consummate smash spot for Derrick Henry. Like, the question is not, does he score a touchdown? Like, the question is, like, does he score multiple touchdowns in this game? And going along with that, not like, does he have like 50 yards? Does he have like 150 yards rushing? Like, this could be the ultimate smash spot for Derrick Henry, especially after what had to be a really disappointing debut with the Ravens. So for me, it was like a struggle of, I don't want to put him too high in the rankings, knowing that he is slowing down. He wasn't all that great last week, but man, like, he's certainly top 10. And if you made a case for him being top 5, like, I wouldn't argue with you too much.
Cool note from Fantasy Points Scott Barrett that from 2018 to 2023, Derrick Henry in wins, 22.5 fantasy points per game, and losses, 12.3 fantasy points per game. So Dwayne really is one of the more game script dependent backs out there. We saw with the utilization last week, but in a game we expect the Ravens to be leading, tough to find a player with a better role than Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, last week, 70% of the snaps, the Ravens were down by 4+ points, which is the breaking point to where you start to see teams changing their behavior. Obviously, the later you go into the game, the more they change their behavior as far as their play calling tendencies go. So the Ravens were in a pass first mode, dropping back 69% of the time. That's simply not going to happen against the Raiders as 10-point favorites. So I think it's just pretty straightforward. It's like Freedman says, perfect game script. Henry is going to do Henry things. The Raiders are going to be stuck trying to decide, do we want to stop Lamar Jackson from getting to the edge, or do we just want to go ahead and give Derrick Henry a little bit of runway up the middle against our stiff, slow linebackers? Robert Spillane is a cool-looking dude, but my God, a step late to every single thing on the field. So when I look at these guys, I just don't think they're going to be suited to handle Derrick Henry. Freeman's point is right. Like, he has slowed down a little bit, but I want to say early in that game, if you go back and watch last week, the Chiefs were committed to trying to stop Derrick Henry. They wanted to get the Ravens into a passing mode because that's how they won last year. The Ravens came in with that pass-heavy attack in the championship game, and then they ended up losing, to the Chiefs. So when I think about the way that these games have played out in the past, I wasn't surprised to see the Chiefs sell out to stop Henry. And he still got a touchdown in the first half of the game, and he is still clearly the lead back there. He had over 55% of the rushing attempts. So I don't think you're going to see near as much Justice Hill this week. So I've got Henry upgraded to that low-end running back one territory. I agree with Freedman. What I wrote in the Risers and Fallers is like, this feels like one of those 125 yards and 2 touchdown games. Like that could totally happen this week against the Raiders.
Certainly looking forward to getting in one of those, 2 anytime touchdowns and 100+ yards, same game parlays over at DraftKings Sportsbook this weekend. But yeah, game script couldn't be better. I think we all agree the Ravens have a really freaking good offense. And even this specific matchup, really, really, really looking good. Every week in my, manifesto report that you can find on FantasyLife.com, I take the overall sum of every offense's yards before contact per carry and the defense's yards before contact allowed per carry, get some nice one-way metrics to help kind of measure some advantages at the line of scrimmage. And this week, drum roll, yes, the Ravens have the second best on paper matchup in the run game. So if there is any more reason not to love, Derrick Henry, again, all in on the big dog this week. Let's get a little bit more negative though, Freedman. We do have our RB faller as Ramondre Stevenson versus the Seahawks, which might be confusing for some because the man did go out there in week 1 and have a pretty awesome performance. That said, probably shouldn't be expecting the Patriots to be playing with that sort of lead all too often.
This is great. So he is one of Dwain's fallers. He's one of my low-key Freedman's favorites. And if you look at the rankings, we have them both at number 18, which is like the perfect way of thinking about Stevenson, where he's a little bit of a Rorschach. Like, you can look at him and kind of like get to wherever you want to get. Like, I will give the positive case for Stevenson. And since he's one of Dwain's fallers, Dwain can give the negative case. Like, obviously we know what he did last week. He looked great. He looked a little bit like his, 2022 version where he had over 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns, 88 targets, 210 carries. I think it's a situation where even though the Seahawks looked pretty good on defense last week, we should remember that they were going against Bo Nix. Like, I don't want to put too much weight on what happened in one game under a new head coach, Mike McDonald. Like, yes, the Seahawks, they could be much better on defense than they were last year, but I just want to make sure that they do it again against someone like Stevenson before I think that they can actually stop the run at will. I think in this game, the Patriots, coming off of a big win on the road, they are now at home. They are going to use Stevenson as much as they possibly can. And the offensive line was, I can't say it was like even that good last week because they still weren't getting a lot of push. Stevenson was doing so much of the work on his own, but I think even if the Patriots fall behind, they're going to run the ball as much as they possibly can. It would be kind of a surprise if Stevenson had any less than 14, 15 carries in this game, a few targets on top of that. And like that on its own could be enough to get him there. And he's got the upside for more, just given the volume, the potential efficiency that he could have, and the fact that the Seahawks maybe aren't as good as they looked last week.
Shots fired, Dwain. How do you respond?
Yeah, I just look at it and I say it's the Patriots. And it is just an interesting way of Freedman and I both coming at it, and we end up with a rank that's very similar. So when I say downgrade, my point is guys, don't get your hopes up that you're getting 20 fantasy points per game out of Ramondre Stevenson. The utilization is certainly there. He dominated. But we also have to remember that Antonio Gibson came up with an injury late last week to his hip, so he wasn't playing at 100%. I think his snaps will be closer to the 30-35% range rather than the 20% what we saw last weekend. Maybe that won't happen this week. Maybe it will be completely the Ramondre Stevenson show. But let's remember, we've got KJ Osborne and Tyquan Thornton running out here as starting wide receivers. We've got Hunter Henry, an old, slow white dude, playing tight end, not adding any explosive plays. We've got Jacoby Brissett sitting back there throwing passes still. So this is a Patriots offense that when we look at it, we look at the team totals this week, it's one of the lowest on the slate. I am with Freedman. I don't know that the Seahawks defense is good or not. They did hold down the Broncos in week 1, but last year they were one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. So they still need to prove it whenever we think about, what Seattle's done. So for me with Stevenson, I think of him, even though he's like coming in at RB 18 for me, I think of him really like the archetype of him. It's a low end running back too. Right? That's what he is. He's a guy that's going to get volume. He's in a really bad offense. It could either be 20 touches for 10 fantasy points, but at least he did show last week. It could also be 20 opportunities giving you 20 fantasy points. So the truth, as they like to say, Ian, falls somewhere in the middle.
Did look good out there in his own, individual performance. 118 of his 120 rushing yards actually came after contact. Also had a week high 10 missed tackles forced per PFF. But again, sadly, not expecting too many scoring opportunities. Only the Broncos, Panthers, and Raiders are implied to score fewer points than the Patriots. Go ahead, Dwayne.
I'm probably burying the lead. The lead here is Ramondre Stevenson's a sell high candidate. Like, I want to get out from under the Patriots offense. And if you have someone in your league that values Ramondre as someone that could be a 20-point per game back, you're trading him away. If you have someone that values him, like the way Freedman and I are essentially talking about him, we're coming from different angles, landing in the same spot. Well, if you need your running back, you just keep him. But if someone is actually excited about his week 1 performance, I would trade Ramondre Stevenson in a heartbeat.
Another guy who certainly is coming off a strong week 1 performance, but I don't know if you should be looking to sell as high on him because I think he's just going to keep on keeping on, is Freedman's favorite, Isaiah Pacheco, Chiefs RB1. Freedman, a lot of concern about Samaje Perine coming in and taking a lot of the fantasy-friendly pass game work, but at least for the start of the season, that was not the case.
Yeah, we have to see how big of a role Samaje has this week. But at least last week, no Jerick McKinnon, no Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That means Pacheco dominated the Chiefs' backfield, 80% snap rate, 79% rush share, 71% route rate. Of course, you can get all that information in our industry-leading utilization report. But the thing is, it's interesting. Even though he got all that work, he didn't dominate. It wasn't like 78 yards and a touchdown, 15 carries, 3 targets. Like, that's fine. That's not, elite. But he has a much easier matchup this week going against the Bengals. Last week going against a tough Ravens defense. This week, the Bengals, who lost run-stuffing defensive tackle DJ Reader this offseason, they weren't all that good with him in 2023. They were number 28 in defensive rush DVOA. And then thinking back to his one game last year, obviously it's just one game, but his one game last year against the Bengals, Pacheco had maybe the best performance of his career, 165 yards and a touchdown on 18 carries, 7 targets, a season high 93% snap rate. Pacheco at home as a favorite of not quite a touchdown, but a pretty big favorite with 3 extra days of rest. This just feels like a Pacheco smash game. So very much interested in him and have him as my, RB5. Highest on the staff at RB5 and very comfortable with that ranking.
Tied for the highest, Dwayne is there with you. Only Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor ranked ahead of Pacheco right now in Dwayne's ranks. And Dwayne, I assume that's because we saw some grade A elite utilization out of the Chiefs RB1 last week.
Yeah, I think the only real thing with Pacheco that worries us at all is just that the Chiefs are going to be so pass happy. So it's like, okay, great. We could get 75% of the rushing attempts, but might that only be 13 or 14, because they want to throw the ball so much. It's going to be so hard to defend them through the air with how diverse they've become and having Patrick Mahomes under center. But the other side of that, it's the Chiefs offense. They're going to score a ton of touchdowns, and Pacheco's going to have his chance to score those as well. So, yeah, it's hard to keep him outside of the top 6, so I had to have him at 5 this week.
We're going to stick to the same game for our RB Sicko Start of the week, but go to the other sideline. That's right, it's Bengals. Pretty clear, surprisingly, RB1 Zach Moss. Dwain, obviously the Chiefs have a really good overall defense, but when we look at their performance against the run, has left a bit to be desired. Last year, I believe they finished the year 5th worst in the EPA allowed per rush attempt, and at least in week 1, man, they actually ranked 30th. So yeah, I get it. That was against Lamar Jackson and company, it was against Lamar Jackson and company. But hey, either way, Zach Moss should have a decent enough matchup. And if he keeps getting fed the rock like we saw in week 1, you got it. This is a good Sicko Start.
Yeah, so our Sicko Start here last week was J.K. Dobbins, who really smashed. And Moss is kind of a similar situation, but also not. I'll explain that. Again, it is a Sicko Start. But the big thing you have to understand here is that in week 1, we saw Zach Moss get 65% of the snaps and 69% of the team's rushing attempts in a trailing game script. So we've already seen the team in the kind of game script that we're expecting against Kansas City, and that coaching staff opted to put Zach Moss on the field and keep Chase Brown off the field. So that's number one. We think that the volume is going to be there. And the way I look at Zach Moss is he could basically be Ramondre Stevenson, who we just talked about, because he's in a matchup that we may not necessarily love, but we think that he's the starter and he's the clear starter right now on the team. So that's the biggest thing. And then you mentioned it, Ian, the Chiefs, that was the way to really try to get after them late last year. Now, early in week 1, I just mentioned it, they loaded up to stop Derrick Henry. I don't know that they're going to do that with Zach Moss. If Jamar Chase is out there, you got Joe Burrow under center. We'll see. But the biggest thing here is the utilization. I could totally see Moss, being one of these guys that scratches out a low-end running back 2, a mid running back 2 performance if you really need it. I've got him projected for 14 rushing attempts and 3 targets. So 17 opportunities, he's probably going to be good enough to pay off the Sicko Start.
Santana and Sonoris, his cousins, certainly looking like someone that deserves to be in that low-end RB2 conversation at worst. So, guys, we're going to move on to some wide receivers, but first, a quick word to our friends over at Experian. Experian is to your finances what FantasyLife is to your fantasy league. It is a tool and resource designed to make your life easier. And accordingly, the Experian app is 100% free to download and serves as a one-stop shop for managing your financial health. With so many spending and subscription details to track, let Experian handle it for you. They'll help you find and cancel your unwanted or forgotten subscriptions, helping you save money and focus on what really matters. That's right, winning your fantasy league. Download the Experian app today. Just note that results will vary. Not all subs are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment accounts are required. And you can see Experian.com for details. Lily's a big fan of Experian. I can tell you guys that much. And guess what, guys? We're a big fan of Deebo Samuel going up against the Vikings this week. Christian McCaffrey, again, expected to be sidelined. And Dwain, with no CMC out there, condensing things in the passing game, really good for these wide receivers.
What I just heard Lily say was Deebo dog. That's what I heard. So, yeah, looking at Samuel over these last 3 seasons on plays without Christian McCaffrey on the field, has a 28% target share. What did he do in week 1? Had a 32% target share. And the other thing is when CMC is missing, they give more of the work on the ground to Deebo. We don't really have a running back 2. Elijah Mitchell on IR. They don't trust Isaac Guerrero, the rookie right now. So it's all about Deebo as the running back 2. He had 22% of the team's rushing attempts in week 1. He parlayed 13 opportunities into 77 total yards and a score against a good Jets defense, guys. I get it. The 49ers came out there and scored points, but the Jets are one of the best defenses in the NFL last year, and I think they're going to finish that way again this season when everything shakes out. So when you look at Samuel, one of the most talented playmakers in the league, or as Lily would say, dogs in the league. But he doesn't always get the volume, Ian. But with CMC, very unlikely to go this weekend. He is a mid-range wide receiver 1. I think he's a lock for 10 opportunities. When you get a playmaker and you're going to give him the opportunities, that's all we can ask for in fantasy land. So Deebo, mid-range wide receiver 1, massive upgrade with CMC out. Now, if CMC does play by some chance, then Deebo would move back more into that mid-range to low-end wide receiver 2 part of the conversation.
17 combined targets and carries. And while in full PPR, don't get it twisted, we'll take the targets over the rush attempts. I mean, Freedman, with how efficient rush attempts tend to be in this 49ers offense, man, we'll just take the ball any chance we can get. So how high is too high for you, Freedman, to rank Deebo Samuel this week?
Well, one quick thing I want to say about Devo. Last week, I bet the under on his rushing carries drop, and then 5 minutes later, Christian McCaffrey was ruled out, and I instantly knew I was dead. There was no chance, and of course, the over on that hit within like the first half. But yeah, the rushing attempts are so efficient within that offense, especially in the way that they use Deebo Samuel, just kind of all over the formation. I mean, I would say I have him at the worst as a low end wide receiver 1 or like high end wide receiver 2, but like we know what he's capable of within that offense. We saw it just a few years ago where he had almost 1,800 yards from scrimmage with 14 touchdowns. Last year, 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns, and what felt like a kind of mediocre season for him. As long as Christian McCaffrey is out, Deebo feels like he has well within his range of outcomes, like mid-range wide receiver 1. And that's really not even thinking about the upside case of like, hey, what if he breaks one of these runs for like a long touchdown? That's always within his wheelhouse. So very much like him, high floor. We've always known he has a high ceiling. Now he has the high floor if Christian McCaffrey is out.
People like to slander his separation skills, but you know what? When you can break 4 or 5 tackles on any given play, yeah, it turns out you can still rack up plenty of fantasy points, which we are expecting again out there this Sunday in a low-key pretty great matchup there against the Vikings. Now, our wide receiver faller. It's not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 separate Green Bay Packers wide receivers because Dwain, when you have Malik Willis under center, that's not a great recipe for fantasy football success.
Yeah, I can't believe that producer Swing allowed me to go with the Packers here. I know why, because he hates them. He's a Bears fan. But I had this totally teed up. Devontae Adams is a faller, one of Freedman's favorites last week, so that we could get spicy. But we'll go with the Packers. It's pretty straightforward. Jordan Love is out, and we're going to see Malik Willis under center. Have you guys realized what Malik Willis has been? It's a small sample, 222 snaps since he was drafted in round 3 of 2022. But the completion rate, not good, guys. 52%. The NFL average for a starter is 65%. Yards per attempt, 5.2. NFL average is 7.2. Sack rate, this is insane. 16% of the time this man drops back, he gets sacked. Now, some people will say, well, that's the offensive line. No, guys, quarterbacks actually are major owners of their sack rate. You got to get the ball out. You got to read what's coming at you. You got to be able to manipulate the pocket. Yeah, you can't have complete trash as your offensive line, but a big part of this goes to the quarterback, and that clock inside of Malik Willis's head, it's late. He is constantly late. Interception rate, 4.5%. The league average is 2.2. He's doubling that. Touchdown rate, 0%. I get it. It's a small sample size, but can we get better than a 0? The NFL average is 4.5%. So this is a massive downgrade across the board. Guys, like I loved what Jaden Reed did in week 1. Got excited just like everyone else. Like he's an alpha playmaker, but you can't think of him as anything more than a mid-range wide receiver 4 this week. And that's if you're lucky. Like he could come through with a big play and save you, but man, I wouldn't count on it. Christian Watson, I've moved into wide receiver 5 territory. Romeo Doubs, wide receiver 6, and Dontavian Wicks, can't be anywhere near your starting lineups.
Malik has not thrown for 100 passing yards in an NFL game just yet. And I understand this Titans offense not as good as Green Bay, but yeah, that is a pretty sad situation going over there. Freeman, I'm going to assume you feel the same way, because if you don't, man, that's a problem that you probably need to figure out for yourself. So let's go ahead and move right on to Freeman's favorite. Yes, that's right. It is Cooper Kupp versus the Cardinals. And I don't want to say you guys are cowards because I have Cooper Kupp ranked as my number 1 flex player overall and you guys don't, but you know, some people are maybe saying that. So Freeman, talk about Cooper Kupp against the Cardinals and just how high the ceiling really is here.
You know, Ian, you've inspired me. I need to move Cooper Kupp even higher. I have him as wide receiver 3 right now, but you know, okay. So we say that target volume is everything, and it basically is. 21 targets, a league high 21 targets is what Cooper Kupp had last week. He turned that into, I'm going to say like only 110 yards receiving, 1 touchdown, 14 receptions, and he added 10 rushing yards as well. You know, so in terms of the volume, yeah, that's like vintage 2021 Cooper Kupp. In terms of the efficiency, not even close. When he was at his peak, offensive player of the year, he had 10.2 yards per target. Last week, he was pretty inefficient. He had 5.2 yards per target, but still volume matters a lot. And just in terms of like the eye test, he did look a little bit like his younger self. He looked like really crisp with the route running. He didn't seem to be like running in concrete the way that he was last year when he was dealing with injuries. So he seems healthy. Maybe with all of the volume, he also starts to become a little bit more efficient as he's just worked back into the offense. And the big thing is, with Puka Nacua out for at least the next 4 games, the target volume is something that feels very sticky week to week with Cooper Kupp. So it's not as if we just automatically project him for 20 targets this upcoming week, but man, he's going to get a ton of targets. And then, of course, the matchup. The Cardinals last year were number 32 in defensive dropback success rate. Kupp had 141 and 1 receiving on 9 targets in his one fully healthy game against them last year. He's going to dominate against slot cornerback Garrett Williams, who has just 256 coverage snaps in his career. I think this is a vintage Cooper Kupp game with all of that volume he will have going in his direction.
Yeah, looking at his next gen, stats route chart from last week, pretty clear, guys, that Cooper Kupp is now playing the Puka Nacua role, which was the Cooper Kupp role before that, if that makes sense to everyone out there. So long story short, you're again feeling great about Kupp this week. Just please keep Stafford safe, guys, because that is the one potential red flag here. Rams offensive line is all kinds of banged up. And while Puka Nacua going on IR stole the show, they also put their center/guard Steve Avila and their offensive tackle Joe Noteboom on the injured reserve as well. So not great up front, but again, Stafford Kupp should have plenty of opportunities to, again, hopefully win your fantasy matchups in style. Now, Dwain, it is your sicko start at wide receiver. A.D. Mitchell against the Packers, someone who we highlighted in the Sheesh report and someone who should have every opportunity to bounce back in a major way this Sunday.
Yeah, this one's a little tougher because the Packers, I don't expect to really push, the Colts this weekend because we just talked about what we have with Malik Willis. But the beauty of A.D. Mitchell's profile is that ability to hit those big plays, which Ian, you mentioned. You hit it in the Sheesh report. I should just turn this section over to you. I mean, going back and reading the Sheesh and then looking at the videos that you put on Twitter, you guys got to go check these things out. I mean, there were 3 deep balls that would have added so many fantasy points to A.D. Mitchell's box score. The man had a 28% target share in his first game in the NFL. Like that alone is just eye-popping. But then you look at some of the big plays that he could have hit. This could have easily been a 15 to 20 point fantasy performance instead of the 1.2 that you got in the box score. Now, sometimes you see things like that, and you see a player that's not getting open, highly contested, not really flashy. No, A.D. Mitchell looked great. He looked great. He just got unlucky. Now, you could say maybe not unlucky. Maybe it's just because, hey, Anthony Richardson, he's pretty inaccurate. You're probably going to get more balls like that in the future. And I do agree. But if he just hits one of them, he's going to pay off to be that sicko start that you're going to want in your lineup. The Packers defense, I think it's better than what we saw last week when they had to play against the Eagles, who have multiple weapons that can really almost attack. When they're vibing, they can attack any defense. If you have 3 good weapons, you can disassemble any defense in the NFL. If you just have one, like a really good defense can take that away. The good news, though, for looking at the Colts is the fact that A.D. Mitchell, he's the guy working the deep stuff. Alec Pierce was not good from a target earning ability, but defenses at least have to respect him. So if Mitchell kicks inside of the slot, and then you've got Pittman, really the main target on the team. So I think there's still opportunities for the mismatches here. So yeah, I love A.D. Mitchell as my sicko start. Ian, some reported that in an alternate timeline that actually last weekend, A.D. Mitchell scored 25 fantasy points.
Dwain, it's possible. And accordingly, I think people should be paying a lot of attention to some of those alternate receiving totals with Mitchell, because again, if he just catches 1 or 2 of these, they're usually going to be so downfield that, hey, might have a chance to go ahead and rack up those yards in a hurry. And what better place to go ahead and check out those sort of lines than over at DraftKings? Hey everyone, with the football season kicking off, it is the perfect time to dive into the action with our partners over at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $250 in bonus bets, plus get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium on us. That is something we can all celebrate. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. And stay in on the action. Use your $250 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, and new customers use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $250 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Time for some tight end talk, fellas. And yeah, was not exactly fun out there. Figured out that I believe it was since 2020, that was the single lowest scoring tight end, just week that we had cumulatively in the NFL. So elite tight ends didn't do anything, but guess what? Pretty much no tight end went out there and did anything. So Freedman, we need a favorite, and you're looking at someone playing on Thursday Night Football. Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. Hopefully you're going to turn it around here against this banged up Dolphins defense.
Yeah, last week, Kincaid was the guy I highlighted as my favorite in my article. That obviously did not work out, so I'm doubling down and just going back to the well here. But although his production was paltry, Kincaid still had really good underlying data, 84% snap rate, 83% route rate, just keeping the faith, hoping no Stephon Diggs, no Gabe Davis. Some of those targets eventually find their way to the big tight end. And the Dolphins last year, number 30 in defensive pass DVOA against tight ends. One more week, I'm keeping the faith with Dalton Kincaid, but man, it was pretty painful last week, not going to lie.
And again, I do think that 83% route rate is what's important here. We've all seen the Kincaid Knox splits. They are not ideal, but last year was a little bit more of Knox actually taking Kincaid off the field on passing plays. That was not the case in week one. So as Freedman said, Dolphins secondary 30th in DVOA against the position. They were also the 7th worst defense in straight up PPR points per game allowed to tight ends as well. So Dalton Kincaid still very much a tight end one who should be in lineups of all shapes and sizes. But Dwayne, if you're not lucky enough to have Dalton Kincaid, you might have to get a little bit sick out there. And if you want to do it, you're looking back to that Giants Commanders gross excuse for a game, this time with old man Zach Ertz.
Well, Freedman's doubling down, so I'm going to double down. And Freedman also liked this player last week. It's Zach Ertz. He didn't necessarily hit, didn't kill you because none of the other tight ends hit either, but the process was right, guys. 79% route participation, 17% target share. That's low-end tight end worthy, both of those numbers. We get this matchup against the Giants. I don't think they're necessarily, great in coverage. Zach Ertz, he's just an old dude, but they got to throw it to someone there because Terry McLaurin, Ian, we've got to stand him in one spot and leave him there. So he just checks many boxes. He's got the playing time. He's got the target earning ability. He's got low target competition, and he's got an above average matchup. That makes him a great sicko start. Zach Ertz has low end tight end one upside again this weekend.
Zach Ertz, fun fact, younger than Taysom Hill. That's a real thing. Why is Taysom Hill still a thing in the year 2024? Wow. Just can't get over it. But all right, guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Dwayne and myself will be back tomorrow to break down all things that happen with Thursday Night Football, as well as getting you ready with all the fantasy relevant injuries that you need to know about. So appreciate you guys tuning in. For Freeman, for Dwayne, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I am Ian. Thanks again for checking out the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.